People have spoken about the Palestinian exception, you
Right.
know, but free speech, liberalism, all this kind of stuff, human rights, except for Palestinians.
Right.
We are
And
exceptional.
Yeah. Well, that means one of two things, right? You're the target or you're the token.
Welcome to Friday Night Semites, where we support the right of return as long as somebody else covers the shipping and handling.
Because we canceled our Prime membership.
There you go. No more Amazon BDS all the way. We got a great show for you all tonight. I'm very excited. We have a special guest. But before we bring them on, Sammy, we're going to be talking about something that is, I know you're a math guy. A little bit.
I dabble.
A little bit, but we're going to start by talking about my favorite subject from school, which is geography.
It's another form of math, but yeah.
But more important, how it relates to the mess we're in today and how the words we use are part of the problem. And so the question I want to ask you, Sammy, is do you know where the term Mideast came from?
It was a colonial term. I know that.
Okay.
I believe it was used by the Europeans as a reference to the point they need to cross in order to get to the east, where all the goodies were. They had to stop in the Mideast first.
They had to go the east.
Yeah.
So my understanding is, it was to differentiate for the British, for the French, for all those nice colonialists back in the day, between the Far East, China, Japan, other places, and then they called Arabia, they called it the Near East, and then it became known in the 1850s, the British started calling it the Mideast, but it didn't get popularized till around 1900 by the American Navy. That's when they started calling it the Mideast.
Really?
And so there's that colonial term, but then the one that I did not know until recently was the Levant. The Levant is usually referred to the smaller region of like what's now Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Israel, maybe a little bit of Turkey. Do you know the origins of Levant?
Does it come from leavening of the bread?
It does not come from the leavening of the bread, although I appreciate that. Shout out to the early Passover reference. Levant, which I thought was, because it's used by a lot of people in the region. So I thought that was a term that was native to the region. But Levant is another European invention.
Oh man, shocker.
But this one, not the French originally, not the British, not even the Germans, who I love to hate on, but the Italians.
What?
Yeah, so Levant comes from...
Levantino.
Exactly. Levante. It comes from Italian.
Oh, Levante. That's a Latin. What does that mean? That's like a Latin root, isn't that? They're like a Spanish version.
All right, you're trying to take my Italian and bring it back to the original root. You're trying to one up my colonialism with bring it back to all the way to the Romans.
Does anybody here speak Spanish?
No, in our crew, nobody. In California, nobody speaks Spanish, for sure. But no, it comes from Italian merchants in like the 1500s who are sailing to the eastern side of the Mediterranean. They called it Levante because Levante is rising and the sun was rising in the east.
Yes, Levante rises. So it is like leavening of the bread because the bread is rising. It's all the same root, man. So it is maybe an origin story from there. May the Levant rise up.
May the Levant
and resist colonialism from the Mideast.
That's what's happening. But then the French, when they colonized after World War I and they took over Syria and Lebanon, they called those the Levant states. So that was where that term came from.
Levant.
But now I'm hearing, do you ever hear Swana?
Yeah, I hear Swana a lot.
Break it down, what's Swana for me? That's like the alternative to...
I forget. Honestly, I forget. I mean, there's Mena and there's Swana.
Mena. All right, so
Mena and there's
what's
Swana.
Mena? I'll break down Swana. You got Mena?
I believe Middle East, North Africa.
And Swana is Southwest Asia, North Africa.
Okay.
And so that's the like...
That's more PC.
That's the PC. So we're conflicted on that.
No, although it's more accurate, obviously. It's part of Asia.
That's the that's the point.
I've always said, it's like people don't know that the Mideast is part of Asia. It's the west coast of Asia. It's like the California of Asia.
There
should be a Tupac song.
They should have Tupac and Dre and Snoop
Yeah.
Snoop would do good.
He would do really good.
Yeah. But the reason I want to bring this all up is not just as a geography lesson, but because these terms are colonial terms.
Yep.
They're imposed terms. The border, like a lot of the borders, Syria, Lebanon,
Absolutely.
Iraq, they're all imposed.
Right.
Of course, Israel-Palestine, slightly imposed borders.
I would say so.
And I got to give a shout out to my crew and my soccer fans here. If you look at things like Football, excuse me. That's right. Israel likes to play any international competition, whether it's soccer, FIFA, World Cup, whether it's Eurovision. They always are associated in the leagues with Europe.
War crimes.
They like to go to The Hague.
Yeah,
they like to go to The Hague, just hang out there.
They're gold medal, bro. They're gold medaling at the war crimes.
Taking it to the top.
Yeah.
Whereas Palestine plays and associates with Asia. And I think that Israel, that is in the Mideast, that lives in the continent of Asia, but still associates with Europe.
Right.
I think this is how the roots of what happened and how things get labeled for a conflict that's about land.
Right.
These fools don't know where they are on the map.
Yeah.
How'd I do?
That was good, man.
Oh man,
that was
good.
Really
All
good.
right, I got worried. My professor was gonna give me a bad grade.
No, your professor ain't even here yet, bro.
Speaking of professors, should we bring on our guest?
Let's do it.
All right, our guest tonight is a real professor and one of my favorite authors, for real. He's a New York Times best-selling author, Pulitzer Prize. I'm not gonna list all his damn awards because we'd be here all day. But he wrote one of my favorite books, The Sympathizer. And this man has been really outspoken on Israel-Palestine and has dealt with some of the consequences over the last year. So we're excited to have him on Friday Night Semites. Viet Thanh Nguyen, please come to the garage. Viet, come on over, bro.
Hey,
You're the next contestant on whatever the fuck this is.
Speaking of consequences, welcome to our garage.
Thanks for having me. What's up, man? Good to see you.
Sammy, great to be here.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great, man.
All right. Well, it wouldn't be Friday night. It wouldn't be our, Semitic show, our Palestinian Jewish show without a little cuisine. So today we have for you, Friday night we got some challah, some baklava, and of course some olives.
Nice.
And so, we always like to literally break bread. So challah is, Friday night.
It's an Asian, right?
This is our Asian food. Okay. This is our Asian food. This is our Asian Hebrew food. It's so exotic. It's so exotic. So, you wrote this essay earlier this year called Palestine is in Asia. You see how I led you in with that, beautiful geography lesson?
Wow, so you basically just stole all that from him. I thought you were original.
No, I was definitely co-opting our guest tonight. And Palestine is in Asia, an argument for Asian American solidarity. And it was brilliant, it was in The Nation. Why you wrote that, and would it help bring us closer to a ceasefire if we started referring to all Israelis as Asiatic Hebrews?
Why I wrote it was because, we're here in Oakland in the Bay Area, and this is the place where I got radicalized. I grew up in San Jose, very multicultural San Jose in the 70s and 80s. And then, but I didn't know I was Asian. I sort of knew, but we weren't called that. We were called Orientals, of course, like the late 70s and early 80s.
Wow.
And
people would call you that to your face?
Well, my parents had a little business called the Oriental Funding Corporation, so they themselves called themselves Orientals, right?
Wow.
But some part of me was like, I don't think this is right. But I didn't know how to put it into words.
Okay.
But then I got to Berkeley. I like to call it the University of Communists at Berkeley.
Nice. The People's Republic.
People's Republic.
Yeah.
And
Go comrades.
Yeah, I started taking Asian American Studies classes there, and that was the first time I ever heard the term Asian American. It got me immediately radicalized. And being an Asian American is about being radical because we're making bonds with people who may not be like us. Even though everybody's saying you're an Oriental, the Orientals are saying, no, wait, I'm Vietnamese, that person's Chinese, we hate each other. Or that person's Japanese, that person's Korean, they hate each other. Back there,
it's just like the Mideast.
Just like the Mideast, right?
Nice.
Yeah. But here we discover we have something in common. We're all Asians. So we become Asian Americans. All good. So, Asian Americans back then like to think that they were always radical. but I grew up with a lot of conservative Asian people.
Right.
And now we live in a day and age in which it's very clear that all Asian Americans are not radical and not even all liberal. You know, we got a lot of conservative Asian Americans out there doing stuff like trying to destroy affirmative action or being married to J.D. Vance, for example.
Yeah.
Being Asian is great. It's great. We got BTS, we got Boba, we claim all that kind of stuff. Okay. But it only gets you so far.
Yeah.
And I think that when, honestly, when October 7th happened and, Israel's war on Gaza began, I mean, I already had very ambivalent feelings about Israel, but it really helped to sharpen my thinking about why should Palestine be in Asia and why should there be Asian American alliances and solidarities with Palestinians. And actually for me, it goes back to Edward Said, because part of the way I got radicalized at Berkeley was through reading Edward Said's Orientalism. And so did a lot of Asian Americans. But for a lot of people, it sort of just stopped by saying, oh, we're Orientals, but we're not Orientals, we're Asian Americans. And we forgot that Said was Palestinian and that a lot of his work about Orientals was actually based on all the stuff you said at the beginning.
Yeah.
That for him, the Orientals, he wasn't thinking about Vietnamese people, I think, for the most part. He was thinking about Palestinians. He was thinking about Syrians and Arabs and all of this. That was the Orient.
Right.
For the British and the French in the 19th century.
Right.
So that's what I was starting to think about when I wrote that essay.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And so that's how you became radicalized, Edward Said?
I wrote I'm not going to get into it, but yes, I struggled through with Orientalism, and that was the intellectual part for becoming a radical Asian American.
Wow.
But the fun stuff was just hanging out with other Asian American people my age, and discovering we had stuff in common, and that, we could have this kind of cool Asian American politics. Which again only gets us so far. Cool Asian American politics is good, but representation matters. But what does it mean if we have conservative Asian Americans representing us, or Asian Americans who support the military-industrial complex? And that's when things get much more complicated than we share the same food.
Yeah, like Kamala Harris. What were you gonna say?
Yeah. So, well, you mentioned it because you said going to Berkeley and everything, but I was curious because Vietnamese-American, politics tends to be a little more conservative.
A lot more conservative.
I'll let you say it.
Why is that?
Well, because, the whole Cold War was fought in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. Obviously, it was very hot. 3 million Vietnamese people died, hundreds of thousands of Laotians and Cambodians and Hmong died. And all these populations were split. There were like pro-American, anti-American, pro-communist, anti-communist. I happened to be, not by any choice, part of the anti-communist Vietnamese world, because my parents were Catholic and the Vietnamese Catholics are really anti-communist. But then our side lost the war, and so we fled as refugees to the United States. And the Vietnamese brought their anti-communism with them to the United States. All the communist Vietnamese stayed in Vietnam.
Right, sure.
They went to France. They went to France.
Yeah.
But the anti-communist ones came to the United States,
Right.
and they gravitated immediately to the Republican Party in the 80s because they associated
Reagan.
Republicans,
Reagan.
with capitalism and anti-communism and religion. I think these are some of the major factors, right? And I've just been completely out of step with the Vietnamese community since I was born, I think, because I was raised being anti-communist, but it didn't work. And recently I was on book tour, and this young Vietnamese-American woman comes up to me. She's in her 20s, and she's a fan of my work.
Yeah.
But she says to me, "You are the second most hated person in my parents' household."
Wow.
The most hated person?
Can we guess? Yeah. I don't want to guess.
The most hated person? Joe Biden.
Wow.
But that was then. Wow. I mean, now it's probably Kamala Harris.
Old Joe Biden.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Joe Biden of November or whatever it was, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Who's number 3?
I don't know. The next Democrat in line. I don't know who that would be.
Man, you're in the top 2. How do you feel about that?
I think it's okay.
Like some people want to be in the top 5, but you're in the top 2.
I'm actually good with being top 2. Top 1. Number 1 is maybe a bit too much for me.
Yeah, too much pressure.
I grew up in the Vietnamese refugee community. I love Vietnamese people, all this kind of stuff. And I believe that we should tell stories about our people, whatever that happens to be. But if you disagree with your people, as I often do, whether they are Vietnamese or Asian Americans or Americans,
right?
you got to speak the truth.
Right.
So yeah, you got to represent your community. But if you think your community is wrong, what are you going to do? And so I think this, like, all the politics that we're witnessing today, including Palestine and Gaza, this is a real test for a lot of people.
No, I mean, as a Jewish American, I don't ever face that issue about having to speak out and disagree with my community, especially on Israel-Palestine. It's all just safe, and when I do speak out there, they just applaud. They just just applaud. They thank you for finally telling them to shut the fuck
up. I'm actually kind of happy. Like, I teach at the University of Southern California, and I teach a Vietnam War class. I have a lot of Vietnamese students in there, and they've come up to me and said, my parents don't want me to take this class because they think you're a communist.
Wow.
And I'm like, what's wrong with that? But because besides that, it's like, it's interesting that some of the older Vietnamese really, I think, don't like me because their kids will listen to me more than they will listen to them. Ooh. Sometimes.
Do you identify as a communist?
I identify as a Marxist atheist.
Ooh, okay. Difference being?
The difference being, I think that for me, I haven't quite worked myself up to being a communist yet or an anarchist, but I might get there someday.
Yeah.
But I'm comfortable saying Marxist atheist because I grew up in the Catholic community. My parents are very devout Catholics, and I just completely reject that. So I feel comfortable. Marxism, I've read a lot of Marxist theory. I went to UC Berkeley.
Yeah.
And I think you need Marxism because it's the only valid critique of capitalism out there right now. You can't trust capitalists to critique capitalism.
See, I don't understand why you're only number 2 now. I feel like you got to be number 1. Like Joe Biden, Comrade Kamala, they're faking it, and you're the real deal.
Well,
let's not spread that around too much.
Yeah, for sure. Don't worry, we're not filming this or anything.
Right. He's still Marxist. They're full on communist.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I've always been interested in that take. I mean, obviously, I went to Berkeley too, so I received the communist pamphlets every day on my way to class as well. I'm just wondering, on your end, you've obviously faced a lot of backlash for being associated with it. Like you said, people don't want to take your classes. But this is a little off track.
Why are you apologizing to me, bro? I'm just gonna eat my food.
I always ask people who either identify as Marxist or as communist, what is your sales pitch for communism?
I don't really have a sales pitch for communism because, I still wrestle a lot with like the actual realities of communism, like what happened in these countries.
Yeah.
And obviously, like we're talking about Cambodia or Vietnam and so on. Like, millions of people died.
Yeah.
But let's be fair. Yes, when people get into power, millions of people die because they have authoritarian genocidal regimes and things like this, or they kill their opponents and all of that. And it's very personal, because I fled from Vietnam when I was 4 years old. I was taken. I didn't really have much choice when I was 4.
Right.
My 16-year-old sister, we left her behind. And so the victorious communist regime made my 16-year-old sister join a volunteer youth brigade, which is a euphemism because obviously she didn't volunteer to go be sent to the jungle to help rebuild the country.
Yeah.
Right? So it's complicated. But to be honest, like when you talk about, the usual line is communists killed millions of people. Well, capitalists did too. They killed tens of millions of people.
Right.
So let's just be honest about that.
Outside of our country.
Inside of our country and outside of our country.
Too.
Like, what is slavery? Slavery is a form of capitalism.
Sure.
Right.
Genocide is a form of capitalism when inflicted on indigenous peoples.
Right.
But somehow all those millions of deaths don't count. But we're only going to talk about the deaths that communism has committed. So this makes everybody uncomfortable because you got to pick a side. You got to condemn capitalism or you got to condemn communism. And as a writer, I feel like, I want to be able to try to speak the truth. Like when human beings do terrible things, you have to be critical of them no matter what side they're on. So, that's why I'm ambivalent about both of these perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of authoritarian governments and illegal wars and all the things that go with it, let's talk about the Mideast.
Swana.
The Levant. What do
Thanks
you
for
call it?
That. I never knew. It just sounded very exotic.
Yeah.
You hear the Levant,
teacher.
Levantine.
The teacher has become the student.
Yeah. What do you call it? What do you call that region? Or what do people call it these days?
Well, when I was growing...
You're teaching the kids, you're at USC, what are the kids calling it?
I grew up as an American, so in the 70s and 80s, that meant I was not reading Edward Said as a kid in San Jose. I was watching TV.
Right.
The most intellectual I got was reading Newsweek or Time Magazine at the dentist's office. So I just absorbed whatever was being said by every other American or mainstream media, and so I just called it the Mideast. Right?
Yeah.
I was just very confused. Of course, I was reading it. the news about what was happening. I think I was aware that there was the Israeli siege of Beirut, for example, in 1982. But I was 11. What are you supposed to make out of that? You would see the Marines getting killed in the Beirut barracks, for example, and it's all this weird politics and stuff. And I think my only education into sort of these politics was watching Exodus. I don't know have you guys ever seen
Charleston Heston? No,
close.
No,
another white guy.
Which one? Which of the old white guys?
Two more guesses.
No, it's
Marlon Brando.
He's also Jewish.
No.
He's also Jewish.
Oh God! Oh, you're putting me on the spot.
Well,
I don't get my own people.
Seriously.
He played Moses?
No, he didn't play Moses.
It's Exodus.
But he's in
Larry
Exodus.
David.
Very good. All right,
is
I'll
it?
put you out of misery. Paul Newman.
Paul Newman. Oh man.
Exodus is not about the
Fucking
biblical
salad
Exodus.
dressing.
It's about Jewish refugees fleeing from Europe, and they want to make it to Israel and colonize Palestine, right? Or colonize Palestine. And Paul Newman plays this very handsome, obviously,
good-looking
officer of the Jewish officer of Haganah. Is that how you pronounce it?
That's good enough
Okay.
for me.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I'll take it.
Who's trying to get these Jewish people to Palestine in the face of this hostile British army. And then, of course, when they get there, they have to fight the Arabs, who are terrorists, right? And so, that was just a part of my life growing up, that this was the only exposure that I had, was basically what I call propaganda.
Right.
Because that was a major Hollywood blockbuster from 1960.
Yeah.
And I was watching it in 1980. And, I've said that Hollywood is our unofficial ministry of propaganda. This is how we absorb these kinds of ideas, not because someone's necessarily forcing us to learn about the Mideast in this way. It's just pop culture, and that's what I absorbed growing up.
So you're pushing back now against some of that propaganda in your essays and your writing, and I know that after October 7th, you had some speaking engagements that were canceled. And I can't remember the exact locations. I think it was the 92 Street Y.
92 NY is what they call it,
Where's that?
It's in New York City. So it's a self-identified, explicitly Jewish institution. It's very
92,
storied.
it's upper west?
Yeah, they renamed themselves and everything.
Yeah.
But they also have a really famous art series, speaker series. A lot of famous novelists and artists go through there and give talks.
So when you get canceled, what was their explanation for why you got canceled? What was your response? Looking back, how do you feel about it?
October 7th happened.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, anytime where civilians are being murdered, it's a tragedy, no matter who's doing it. But at the same time, there's a whole history, as you guys have obviously talked about before that.
Yeah.
And, my immediate reaction was, this is going to be like 9/11 all over again.
Yeah.
Because when 9/11 happened, Americans freaked out and then, committed to a forever war that killed millions of people who had nothing to do with 9/11 and this sort of in this paroxysm of paranoia and revenge and violence. And I felt that, the role of the artist is not to participate in that. The role of the artist, the writer, the intellectual, the comedian is to draw attention to those moments when societies, freak out and do the wrong thing. And
You see, he
I would
looked
say
at me. You looked at me when he said comedian?
I looked down, so I was like, I definitely participated in that.
You got intellectual, but I got comedian.
Well,
so.
I remember when October 7th happened and politicians were like, well, if you scale it to the population of Israel, it was like 100 9/11s. It's like, let's not count 9/11s.
Yeah, no, that's never a good thing.
That's never a good thing.
Yeah, so it's not about a quantity or anything like that, but it was really, for me, very clear that nothing good was going to come out of this, out of what was probably going to happen. And then what did immediately start to happen. So I signed a letter along with 750 or so other artists and writers from all over the world saying we need a ceasefire.
Right.
I think I probably compounded it by going on my Instagram and saying, yes, I signed this letter calling for ceasefire, but I also affirm my commitment to BDS.
Right.
Okay. So I'm not sure which of the two things was the trigger for
BDS
the
sure.
92nd Street Y.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But other people who signed that letter got canceled in different ways, eventually doing different things. So how did I find out? I found out the afternoon of my event at the 92nd Street Y when I got a message from my publicist saying they've postponed the event, but they've indefinitely postponed the event, which I interpret as cancellation.
Yeah.
And then I got a message from the 92nd Street Y's poetry coordinator. It's a poetry series, who's himself Jewish.
Yeah.
As are a lot of people who work for the 92nd Street Y. And he was completely outraged. He said, we have to make this event happen because we cannot censor or cancel events simply on this basis.
Right.
Anyway, it led to a whole... I was canceled, but like a lot of the staff quit.
I remember.
From the 92nd Street Y. And that fallout has continued to happen. Even more staff have quit at the 92nd Street Y in the months afterwards, Jewish and non-Jewish. So there's a lot of internal tension, as you know.
Well, and just in all these arts and cultural organizations and, of course, universities of, these questions of free speech and, where are those lines? Because now what you're seeing happen a year later is the free speech wars have gotten worse. So in New York last month, there was a progressive-ish rabbi who was supposed to speak. Rabbi Shmuley. Not Rabbi Shmuley, not that guy. That's a real guy, not my fan. And he was supposed to speak, and he got canceled because he was a Zionist. Mm-hmm. The bookstore said, we don't let Zionists speak. And this is a guy who's been critical of Netanyahu, who wants a ceasefire, who still identifies as a Zionist. That's not exactly my line, and I don't understand all those contradictions, but people are full of contradictions. And how do you balance like the boycott, divestment, sanctions, like boycotting Lockheed Martin, boycotting warmongers, boycotting Airbnb, who does, has apartments that are in settlements in the West Bank. But I'll be honest, when you're boycotting artists and writers, it gets a little more tricky for me. And so I'm just curious. I don't have a definitive line. And so I was curious, like, what your opinion is on boycotting or not boycotting on Israel-Palestine on all sides.
I feel some of the same ambivalence, I signed on to BDS because I think we should boycott Israel and have divestment and sanctions against the country, against institutions and things like that. I have a lot more ambivalence about canceling individuals. And that particular rabbi, I believe, is affiliated with 92nd Street Y.
Probably.
I think he directs some of their arts and literature stuff. And so I wasn't happy about that.
Yeah.
I just... Look, this is a part of a larger conversation in the country about who can speak and who can't about certain issues, and when should we cancel and when shouldn't we. And it's true, I think, that all sides do it. The left has been responsible for some of this cancellation and boycotting of speakers and writers and books they don't disagree with. But we also have to talk about it as not simply being like both sides are the same.
No.
Because the left is not in general arguing like we should burn books or ban books or anything like that. So it's still radically different. But I just don't think I've always been hesitant about canceling individuals. Just let them speak. If you disagree, go and protest and get a dialogue with them. Or the dialogue may not be productive, but at least you're going to have that conversation and people can make up their own minds. But just shutting people down on the basis of their beliefs is not productive.
I disagree. I think canceling individuals makes for good controversy. Like, for instance, the YouTube title for this show will be Canceled Professor.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it'll get us a lot of views, so,
it's the best. See him before he's canceled again.
Yeah.
See the episode that got him canceled.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's tough. Then at the same time, because these fine lines, you're at USC.
Okay, but wait, let me ask you guys. Have either of you been canceled?
Yes.
Okay.
This guy more than me.
No, I can't.
I've seen some of your stuff. I'm surprised,
I don't know. People don't want to cancel me for some reason. I guess I bring too many sales in.
So you were canceled?
Yeah, no, I've been... Basically, what happens to me is every 2 or 3 years, I get invited to a Jewish institution, like a JCC, a museum, or the Jewish Studies Department, and they're like, we want to reach more young people. And I'm like, I'm not reaching... They think I'm still relatively cool, and they're like, come in and help us reach young Jews. I come in, I do my thing, I do my performance, I do my shtick, and at the end, usually, that's when I, go in on Israel-Palestine. I get disinvited, I get kicked out, then I get put on a list and blacklisted from events for like another 3 or 4 years. Then a new program officer comes in and is like, hey, we need to reach young Jews. who's that guy in the Bay Area who wears those dumb hats? You know, like, and so like that's the
and he's
thing.
not talking about yarmulkes.
Yeah.
He's talking about the baseball
Thank
cap.
you,
Just want to
thank
clear
you.
the
Yeah.
anti-Semitism accusations.
No, my self-hating is not about the
jeez.
hats.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
about everything else. And so it's been a while since I've been like in the middle of a thing where they try to take the mic from me. But you know, it's been a pandemic and like I've had some kids, so it's been a little while. But this guy gets heckled.
Yeah, I get heckled, but I've never actually been canceled myself. The closest is there was a Jewish teacher at a Jewish school.
Why are you looking at me, bro?
Because
It's not my cousin.
It's not my cousin. Because he's your friend.
It's not my cousin.
And he played.
Oh, this is a true story.
Yes, he played.
This is
my
family
story. I was looking at you.
No. This is my fucking cousin.
He played. It's your cousin. He played my stand-up clip for his class. It was a clip about Zionism. Very, very moderate take. Not really too incisive at all. And he got fired.
My Jewish cousin got fired in
Wow.
Chicago for using a piece of his.
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's collateral damage.
Bro.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Bro.
Yeah.
You're a good ally.
I am. I really am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
so that your cousin got fired, but you know the other thing about cancellation is that hey, it's actually kind of beneficial sometimes. Like people are like, oh, you got canceled, your book sales are going to go up.
Oh, for sure.
Because there's that kind
Yeah.
of weird contradiction
Yeah.
about the cancellation. I mean, obviously one side hates you, but your side, you know, it's like, well,
Right.
we're gonna support this person.
And so, you know, being a professor, you're not canceled. You actually are teaching at USC, and we're back here in the fall semester now. What have you noticed the differences are this semester compared to spring semester when you had, you know, the protests and the encampments really going on heavily? Has anything changed with the whole free speech movement? Does it feel the same?
Well, I think all of academia was just sort of caught flat-footed, didn't know what to do. So you saw a whole spectrum of reactions from different university presidents and police officers and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, you know, the worst of it was at Columbia and UCLA, and to a certain extent, you know, my university, USC. You know, like 100 students were arrested and campus was shut down. Yeah, graduation was mostly canceled, and
The valedictorian wasn't allowed to speak.
completely silenced,
Yeah.
right? I think now what everybody's recalibrating, right? It's like making adjustments.
Right.
So now there's much more strict campus speech codes, and at my university, all that stuff has been implemented. You can supposedly have free speech as long as you don't go too far
Right.
or take over the campus. So now on my campus, like the whole center of the campus is still gated off,
Wow.
you know,
Really?
where the protests were being
Wow.
held. And so it's so ironic that, you know, in defense, supposedly defending free speech, you know, you make the campus look like a prison,
Right.
to replicate what's happening in Palestine, you know,
Where-
unironically.
Right.
Whereas
ironically, I don't know.
before they just had the gates on the outside to keep out the rest of South LA.
South LA.
Yeah, they still have that. They still have that.
So now gates
Now
on the
there's gates
outside
within
and the
gates.
inside.
Yeah, now you got to swipe a card to get in. You have to go-
Checkpoints.
Yeah, there's checkpoints.
Wow.
There's checkpoints to get in, multiple checkpoints.
What does it feel like?
It feels like, I don't know if people get it. It's like, you know, whatever we are doing to Gaza and to Palestine through our support of Israel, you know, leading to this kind of militarized environment and everything like that, we're just seeing these ripple effects through our own society.
Yeah.
Whether it's through, you know, prevention of free speech or locking down campuses or making people go through security checkpoints. So the ripple effects are real.
Yeah.
You know, and we're just feeling a touch of it. But I mean, I just hope the students get it, that when they see these checkpoints, it's not because of student protesters being at fault. It's the university administrations, you know, not having an adequate response.
What's been the faculty response like?
I mean,
I'm not trying to get you to sell out your colleagues,
I mean,
but how's the economics department doing with
let's
your?
not name specific departments or specific
Yeah.
people.
How's-
It's like you don't become a university.
How's the math department?
Yeah.
Or like
The
your
math department's
specialty?
probably chill. You got the math department's
they're
chill, right?
So radical.
Geography is on
Yeah.
point though. Good, right? They're good.
Yeah.
No.
I think we eliminated our geography
University.
department. I don't think we even have any
I'm
geography.
starting it.
Welcome to Upper Division. Here's how you look at what countries.
All right, come on. All right. So
I
what's,
mean, look, you don't become a university professor by being radical. It's just
Yeah.
not the way it works. You know, it's
You did.
so there are a few.
At Berkeley.
At Berkeley. So some places are different than others. Berkeley actually had a pretty good response to the student protest. They didn't arrest people. They didn't crack down.
Of course.
Everything was cool, right?
We're the home of the free
There's
speech
a handful of universities that reacted that
Yeah.
way. But, you know, there were faculty who were standing up for the students, and a couple of my colleagues got arrested with the students. Some of us protested outside the president's office, but that was like a few dozen people out of like 1,500 faculty. So that's probably fairly indicative of not just universities, but of the country as a whole. Most people are not out there protesting or getting arrested for this.
Let me ask you a different question that I've seen has come up this fall as a reaction, which is now the universities not just putting up the checkpoints, as you say, but these new free speech regulations and how they're using diversity initiatives and DEI language as a way to like squash some of it, because what they're saying is Zionists are a protected class. They're saying not Jews, but Zionists. And that to me makes no sense, because that's an ideology. That's like saying socialists are a protected class or capitalists are a protected class. Like, your beliefs are not protected, people should be protected, but they're using that as a way to supposedly fight anti-Semitism. Of course, we want to fight anti-Semitism, but
90% of Zionists are evangelicals. So we have to protect them.
We got to protect our white Christian friends, for sure. Is that what they're doing at USC? Is this a secret thing as a reverse affirmative action to get more evangelicals into USC?
I don't know what it is, but you're right. I mean, like are communists a protected class, for example, when we're talking about free speech beliefs and things like that? So,
no, because you still have to sign that card that in California.
I think I did do that when I went to Berkeley. I think I did have to do that.
You have to sign a card that says you're not communist?
McCarthyism rules are still on the books in California for state employees. So you just put
Marxist atheist. Next question.
Well, I mean, people have spoken about the Palestinian exception, you know, but free speech, liberalism, all this kind of stuff, human rights, except for Palestinians.
Right.
We are exceptional.
Yeah. Well, that means one of two things, right? You're the target or you're the token. One of these two things, or you're the exception.
Token.
Now we have the reverse exception. It's the reverse. Now we're going to protect Zionists. And so, I mean, hypocrisy just seems so absurd to anybody who is cognizant of the situation. But, again, the reflex to condemn anti-Semitism is so deeply embedded by now in this country that it's almost like it is like that McCarthyist thing. Like, of course we're going to be against anti-Semitism, and of course that means we're going to be against people who are against Zionism.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's a distinction between being committed to being against anti-Semitism and turning it into something so sacred that anything that's affiliated with it has to be condemned as well.
How do you explain the difference, like, to your students? Say there's an 18-year-old college kid who comes on campus and is like, I don't want to be against Jews. I don't want to, but so I gotta be against. I'm pro-Zionist. Like, how do you explain that difference? And also, if you want to use that impression.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. That's my 18.
I didn't know you could do that.
That's my stoner. That's my stoner Southern California freshman impression.
Stoners don't make it to USC. We're so elite. We don't have stoners anymore.
We save it for you guys at Berkeley.
That is true, huh?
No comment.
You know what? I mean, I just try to reverse things because, like, I've said a lot of things that are very critical of the United States.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Why can't we do that? Why would I do that?
Yeah.
Well, because I'm an American and I'm a Vietnamese and I know American history and I know what the United States did in Vietnam and in many, many other countries. So you can be critical of the United States without hating Americans. I mean, there's a huge distinction between what the country and the government and the state does as a whole entity versus who the people are, because we know Americans are diverse.
You love all the people of the United States.
Do I love all the people of the United States? That's like saying, do I love my entire family?
Shots fired.
Okay.
My extended family. I'm not talking.
I know you're not.
Cousins.
I know you're.
Everyone has a cousin they hate.
You said you were a recovering Catholic, but the question is, do you love everybody, including the people who put you in the top 2 hate list?
I mean, in my most Zen moments, I do love everybody. I wish peace and love upon everybody.
You're definitely a recovering Catholic. You went Zen on us.
Yeah.
But, you've been in California too long.
In reality, yes, there are antagonistic feelings.
There are other feelings.
You can separate your feelings. I don't want to kill people.
Okay.
But
that's
I think I should be critical.
That's good.
I think we should be critical.
Let's soundbite that part.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, honestly, I have been in recovery, so I can honestly say I don't hate Donald Trump. I spent 2016 to 2020 hating Donald Trump, and I realized that just makes me a worse person. Like, that man made me a worse person because he made me hate him.
So you're trying to. Man, we have so much to learn. He's trying to be a better person.
He's a better person.
I'm trying.
I'm trying. Yeah, for sure.
But I'm going to go home and hate Donald Trump in my closet by myself.
Yeah. quietly just bring it all back.
Well, no, I like that philosophy. I mean, hate. When you hate someone, you actually lose. You're giving them your attention. You're giving them your anger. You're giving them your frustration. So it's actually like they win if you hate them, right?
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said you came here when you were 4 years old, and so do you identify as an immigrant?
I identify as a refugee.
As a refugee.
They're very different.
Can you tell us the difference between immigrant and refugee?
Well, in our xenophobic moment, we kind of dislike immigrants, but we really hate refugees. There's a difference, because like even if you're xenophobic and you're an American, you still think, well, of course immigrants want to come here and they want the American dream. They want the success story.
Right.
So if you meet an immigrant, even if you don't like immigrants, you want the immigrant to say, I love America and I came here and it gave me all these opportunities and look how successful my family is. So you can make sense out of the immigrant because at least you sort of understand that your grandparents or great-grandparents came here as immigrants, right?
Right.
Refugees are different.
Right.
Refugees are, I've called them the zombies of the world. They're the ones that are swimming across the ocean or marching through the jungles and forests to come and invade our land and human assault waves and everything like that. And I think we're really scared of refugees because, number one, we don't want to confront how we might be responsible for making refugees.
Right.
We say there's a refugee crisis as if the refugees are the problem instead of asking whether we're the problem.
Why did they have to become refugees?
Well, that's right. Our capitalism, our militarism, our coups, all that kind of stuff. But then the other thing is I think we're afraid of being refugees ourselves.
Huh.
We look at all of these unsettled populations and they're so frightening what's happened to them and everything. And we just don't want to be contaminated by that specter of the refugee. And now look, with climate catastrophe, we could all be climate refugees at this point. So it's really coming home to so many people. But I think those of us who are comfortable in our lives, whatever that means, we don't want to think that comfort can be blown up at any moment, whether it's by a bomb that the U.S. drops or whether it's by a hurricane or an earthquake or a fire.
There's that phrase I've heard talking about U.S. Imperialism, and the relationship to immigration, which is immigrants and refugees. They're over here because we went over there. Mm-hmm. Like we bombed, we did. So it's like like you said, we talk about why all the crisis is the people, but never the causes and the issues and the reasons why. And obviously for Palestine, refugees is a huge issue. And you've got refugees all over the Middle East. You've got new wave of refugees coming in now. And, my opening line today, which was a mediocre tongue-in-cheek joke about the right of return for refugees back to not just 1967, but 1948 Israel, is one of the biggest controversies, one of the hardest, points in negotiations over the year, because Israel says if all the Palestinians come back, that we will lose our, our demographic majority, because they say
even say that out loud?
They say this is the part that I can never get with. When you say we're a Jewish democratic state, you can't be an ethnocratic and democratic. It's just not possible. And so, as someone who's been a refugee from one country to another, when you look at the refugee situation and that question of the right of return, what do you think about it?
What I think about it is that, number one, the reason why I call myself a refugee, and I still call myself a refugee. I don't look like a refugee. I'm not physically or legally a refugee, but part of me will never forget the refugee experience, the flight and all of that. And so it's important for those of us who are refugees to insist that we're refugees, not immigrants. And that allows me to identify with anyone who is a refugee.
Right.
Whether they were Jewish refugees at a certain point in history or whether they're Palestinian refugees now.
We had a lot of our own.
And the whole idea, just because you're the victims of something, that doesn't give you the justification to do the same thing to somebody else, whether it's a genocide or whether it's making them into refugees. And so undoubtedly, the situation you described is an incredibly difficult situation.
Yeah.
And it should make all of us reflect, okay? Like Israel and Israelis, Jewish people, Palestinians, they all face a very difficult situation. But we in the United States, we face the same thing. right? I mean, what do we owe our indigenous peoples?
Right.
What do we owe the problem of colonization and settler colonization in this country? So yeah, I think we should hold Israel responsible and say, look, you know, if you're a democracy and we're going to support you with billions of dollars in aid, and this is a real political and moral problem, you have to confront it versus trying to, you know, colonize and occupy and do apartheid on people. But you know, we as Americans, I think we also are confronted with the same moral and political situation that we also don't want to confront. It's a very valid critique. And so that's why, you know, for me, I started off at Berkeley being a radical Asian American, thinking about representation and inclusion and equality and all of that. And I'm like, well, that's all important, but much more of my politics are about decolonization.
Wow.
Because I think that's, for me, that's a bigger problem that has led to these other issues of racism and anti-Semitism and things like that. They're all tied up together. But if I had to put one word on the kind of politics I'm engaged in now, it's decolonization. So yeah, decolonization in Israel, but also decolonization in the United States too.
So you're not Arab, right?
I don't think so.
You're not Jewish, right?
I don't believe so.
So you're not Arab or Jewish. Why do you care about Israel-Palestine?
That's a great question. I think I care a lot about it, partly because I'm a human being. I think about the fact that when the Vietnam War happened, for example, you know, in the course of that war, 3 million people died. And sometimes I wonder, what did people all over the world think? Most of the people all over the world were not Vietnamese or Laotian or Cambodian. And they were seeing this stuff happening literally in their living rooms on their TV. It was the first TV war, living room war. They were reading about it in the newspaper. They were seeing the photographs. It was the first like war in which all these horrible images were being distributed all over the world. Really graphic, terrible stuff. And I wondered a lot. Like, people knew this was going on, and there were anti-war movements obviously all over the world. But most people, I think, were just doing their thing. They were just living their lives, right? Right. Because they're human beings. I mean, they got to take care of their family and whatever. And so I wonder about that a lot. Like, that war meant a lot to me, obviously. It totally changed my life and the lives of everybody I knew. And I would have liked to imagine that there were people all over the world who were not Vietnamese, had no connection to Vietnam in any way, shape, or form. And they still cared because it was a human issue. Right. Of human pain, of morality, of justice. They could recognize, hopefully, that they were all implicated in some way. Either by inaction, like they could see it happening, but they didn't do anything. Or in certain countries, as in the United States, they were all implicated because they paid the taxes. That paid for the bombs. And paid for the soldiers and all that kind of stuff.
And the draft.
And so, likewise, it's a human problem. It's a human tragedy. That we've all seen. And we can't deny that it's happening. Now, we can pretend it's not happening, but...
Which we do.
But, you know, in our minds, everybody knows it's happening. Right? And if we're Americans, we are paying the taxes that are paying for the bombs. You know, we are supporting American regimes that support the Israeli regime. So I'm also personally and politically implicated in that. And so I think there's always that test. The test is, like, if something horrible was happening to you and your people, how would you want other people to respond? Right. And take that answer and then apply it to every other horrible situation that you see taking place. And if the answer to this problem is it's intractable, you know, we don't know the solution, that's just not the right response. You know, like, if that's our feeling, then we have to educate ourselves more. I mean, I've taken it upon myself to, like, learn more and read more about what's been going on over the past century and a half. You know,
it's a really simple history, like Vietnam.
It is simple and it's difficult all at the same time because people snow you with all kinds of details. You know, like, what about this detail? What about that detail? And what about this? And what about that? And so if we're confused, if I was confused, then you got to start to read. And so that, like, you know, for me, it's like, it's not just because I'm a professor and a writer, but I really believe that answers are out there. And then people say this, we don't know what to do. It's because they're saying, I'm either too lazy or I'm too busy to find out the answers. And so that's just not an acceptable response for me, right?
How did they end up solving that whole Vietnam War?
Well, one side won and one side lost, you know, and look what happened. Like, for the United States, that was the end of the world. I mean, literally, it actually didn't start in Vietnam. John F. Kennedy, when he was a senator, said, look at Laos. Laos is where the first domino is. That's how we got started.
Right.
Right.
The domino theory.
Right. But it wasn't even Vietnam. It was
Yeah.
Laos. And who
Yeah.
talks about Laos now, right? But then, okay, the dominoes fell in Southeast Asia, and nothing happened. The world is the same in that way, and now we're worried about other dominoes instead, right? And so I take that historical perspective that there's this human horrible tragedy. My side that I didn't choose lost, and yet if we look, and all these people died, and yet now if we go to Vietnam, it's a country of almost 100 million people, because we like to reproduce a lot. It was only like 30 million back then. Now we got 100 million people.
Okay.
Like the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Right. Like the Orthodox Jews.
Right. I
mean, not the secular Jews were slipping.
Yeah. Well, if we were really committing a genocide, how come there's so many Palestinians?
Yeah, that's the worst line. That's the worst line.
Yeah, and it's a communist country, but it's a capitalist economy.
Yeah.
And it's in business with the United States, and the United States sends diplomats and ships and everything, and is trying to pull Vietnam into an alignment against China. And so when I take that long view, I'm like, this is so ridiculous. Yes, the war seemed so apocalyptic back then for everybody who was involved, and that all this time later, everything kind of worked out for the United States, and it kind of worked out for Vietnam. And there's human tragedies to be taken into account. My sister went to that youth brigade. Hundreds of thousands of people were sent to re-education camps. Recriminations were taken, blood feuds were carried out. We have to deal with all of that, But I don't hold it against the Communist Party. Like, I think the Communist Party, they won the war. They're legitimately the government of Vietnam. By me saying this, I'm going to be the most hated person now in that,
for sure.
that household.
Made it to number one. Made it to number one.
But I don't oppose the Communist Party because they're communist. I'm critical of the Communist Party because they commit human rights abuses.
Yeah.
And they put dissidents in jail for criticizing the environmental policy of the government and stuff like that. Anyway, it's a long-winded answer to say that I hope that what seems so apocalyptic now with Israel and Palestine will in 100 years not seem apocalyptic if...
That's right.
If...
That's
we're
right.
able, if not we, but if they are able to address what seems to be an impossible situation. Everything always seems impossible when you're in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but you're saying if we're drawing parallels here, the way to end this war is by the U.S. staying in it so long that we lose.
You know what? When you go back to the example of Vietnam, what the U.S. believed was that we are the greatest and most powerful country on earth. There's no way this little guerrilla army is going to win.
You're not making any parallels here. I can't see where you're going with this.
We're going to bomb the crap out of them.
No, where are you going with this?
Right. And in fact, the United States dropped more bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in an 8-year span than it did than all the bombs that were dropped in Europe during World War II.
Right.
Did the Viet Cong wear sandals too?
They wore rubber tires. If you go to Vietnam, you go to the tourist sites where they show you what the Viet Cong were doing. They were carving rubber sandals out of rubber tires.
Wow.
I wanted to ask you with the Sympathizer. One thing I loved about the book and the show is you make clear that it's, anti-war, it's clearly anti-imperialist, anti-war, against the U.S. aggression. And yet, kind of what you're saying, you do show the complexity and the nuance on both sides and atrocities committed on both sides. And whenever we talk about Israel-Palestine, when you say the word complex, or the right wing often uses the phrase, it's too complex, as a way to shut down debate. But there is nuance, there is complexity. So how do you hold both the big picture politics of solidarity and anti-imperialism without falling into this, the worst thing you can do is both sidesism. Mm-hmm. But there are things on both sides there are also power dynamics. Mm-hmm. There is one side that has, sandals and the other side that has nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. So how do you hold that? And what would you say to writers today who are writing about Gaza, Israel, West Bank in the way that you wrote about North and South Vietnam?
So for me, art and politics are not the same, but they overlap, right?
Right.
And so when you're doing politics, it's hard to do both sides because you got to pick a side.
Yeah.
Right. And so for example, in the aftermath of the war in Vietnam, Jimmy Carter, the president, Democrat, said the destruction was mutual on both sides. That's basically both sides' issue, right? And that's factually wrong.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy.
This is wrong. It's like 3 million Vietnamese people died, 58,000 Americans died. You bombed Vietnam. Vietnam never bombed the U.S. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Okay. So politically, you got to take a stance, and you have to mobilize and do all that kind of stuff. But as a writer, if I'm writing a tract, if I'm writing an op-ed, I can take a side, right? But if I'm writing a novel, it's not potentially as, and you could write a novel just on one side, that's fair too. But in this case of this novel, I did want to take into account the fact that there were legitimate feelings on both sides. I'm not saying both sides were justified.
Right.
I'm saying if we recognize that people are human beings, that they have complex feelings and so on and so forth, we could recognize, for example, that our loved ones could be on the wrong side of an issue, but we still love them.
Right.
And they could still be really good people, and yet they've chosen a side that we disagree with.
That's me and Sammy all the time.
All right.
I love them, but
That's
I'm like,
right.
why this shirt? I mean, what are you really thinking today?
You chose this shirt, bro.
Both of you will write your own memoirs someday.
Yeah.
Talking about all the backstory and everything
Mine's
like that.
called This Side of the Couch by Josh Healy.
But I think
that was a
interesting
J.D.
art,
Vance book.
interesting art has to deal with that human complexity.
Yeah.
I mean, and it doesn't mean that it can't be political. I mean, but I mean, like we're living through that as a country now. Like we love our uncle, and our uncle supports Donald Trump. What are we going to do? That's like one just minor
That's
example
everyone's
of that.
uncle.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always the uncle. It's always auntie's good, but it's always the uncle. Well, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. We appreciate
We hope
you.
it doesn't get you canceled too much.
Or we hope it gets you canceled at just the right amount.
Just the right amount. That's the key, Josh.
Like,
Just the right amount.
Yeah.
We look forward to having you back on.
Oh, as long as you guys don't cancel me, then
Yeah.
I'll be back on.
No, we won't.
We'll discuss
We
it.
can't- we don't have that kind of power.
We'll have the Semitic
I
caucus.
have to say that you
Yeah.
guys are terrible comics. Is that going to get me canceled?
No, that's great.
Did I cross the line?
You would
at
not
this
be
point?
wrong.
Okay.
Astute observation and to be determined.
I'm just trying. How far can I go before I get canceled on this
Yeah.
show?
Cancel Professor is a good title, I would say, anyways.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate you. And, good luck with the rest of the semester. Good luck with the next book. And, help us write our way out of this crisis, all these crises, so that people can stay where they want to stay and not be forced to leave. And those who want to come home, they can come home. So I think that's what we're going for.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Sammy. It was a great conversation.
Appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Happy Friday night.
All right.
Yes, always do a cheers. Yes.
Yes, salud, l'chaim, look in the eyes for all the reasons we know. Happy Friday night. We out.